Talk a bit more about tax. I mean, we had that 2022 report by the IRD, which basically said that a middle wealth New Zealander had an effective tax rate of about 20%, and the richest families in New Zealand, the 311 that they looked at, had a tax rate of about 10%. It was 9.4, but it was about half. Gee, I mean, IRD says it's our job to be fair. Why is it that the richest families in New Zealand are paying half the rate of tax as a middle income grunter?
Because it's a totally bogus study based on false premises, and let me explain how it works. That study looked at the paper gain in people's assets.
Yes, it was capital gains, wasn't it?
So in 2021, the average house in New Zealand went up $135,000. Now, if we took the IRD study seriously, then every New Zealander who owned a home would have had $135,000 of income that had to be taxed. For most people, that would be 33%, and everyone would have had a $45,000 tax bill just because their house went up in 2021.
Yes,
now so you know,
I understand that, and you're right. It's largely because of capital gains.
If you think that's ridiculous, then I don't know why you're talking about this silly study.
Well, it was done by the IRD. I mean, it's not some dude down at the sort of petrol station.
It was done by the well, what's your problem with dudes at the petrol stations?
Well, they probably don't know as much about tax as the Inland Revenue.
Well, they know that they're paying it, and they know they're going to be glad that we've got a government that is finally allowing people to keep some more of their own money.
I guess
when it comes to this dude at the IRD, I mean, you have to actually recognise that the premise of that study was set up to get a certain result that nobody takes seriously, because if you take it seriously, you would have to tax every person on every paper profit. But people would have to pay tax on their KiwiSaver. If the value of your KiwiSaver went up a few percent, you'd pay tax on that.
What is so special about exempting capital from tax? Because I see it's even in your constitution. Capital should never be taxed.
That's right.
What is the inherent difference and fairness that my work at the factory or dude at the petrol station is taxed, but my capital gains on, say, investment property is not taxed? Why is that fair?
Well, first of all, it is taxed because you'll know that the value of a capital asset is the value of the revenue that it produces in future years. That revenue is taxed under an income tax system. So if you have a business, say Guyon sets up 30 Minutes with Guyon, it becomes a very valuable franchise all over the world, and you say, David, I want to sell it to you. I think you're going to get 100 million in revenue in the future, so I want $100 million for it. I'm going to turn around and say, sorry, mate, I'm going to pay 28% company tax on that. Therefore, I'm only prepared to pay you $72 million. So your $100 million of capital gain is 72 because I'm pricing in the tax I'll pay for owning your business in the future. So it is taxed. The second thing is we as a country are starved of capital. We don't have the investment. We can't afford the infrastructure. We're not investing enough in private capital in our businesses. That's lowering the productivity of the guy or girl in the factory who wants to get higher wages and afford the things they need for themselves and their family. Now, some people say, oh, we don't have enough capital, let's put a tax on that as well. I think that's completely nuts. We should be doing everything we can to attract more capital in this country. We already tax it through income tax, the way I just outlined.
Well, let's talk,
so why put another tax on it?
Let's talk a little bit about attracting capital, because you have some ministerial responsibility in the foreign investment area. I see in your constitution for the ACT Party, you say that foreign investment should be restricted only if an investment threatens national security. So you're good with foreigners owning anything in New Zealand except if it threatens national security?
Well, I don't really see what your objection is.
I haven't expressed an objection. I've asked you a question.
Yeah, well, then the answer is yes, but the challenge is back to people to explain why they object.
Okay, so you're good with foreign ownership of anything other than if it represents a national security problem?
Well, that's the role of government, is to protect us from threats.
So how's
outside.
it worked out with the, say, selling all our banks to Australia, for example?
Well, this is the problem, Guy, and you've got a real problem with pronouns, and I didn't expect this from you. I thought you'd be more sensitive. You said, can we afford tax cuts? We're selling all our banks. Actually,
I did not expect this interview
I
hadn't got pronouns on my question line anyway.
I know, I'm very sensitive about use of pronouns. Now, you're saying our banks. Well, actually, we don't own them. Private companies and shareholders own them. And
how has it worked out for New Zealand having all the big four banks owned by Australia?
Well, how
has that worked out? Worked out
they're not owned by Australia. They're owned by certain shareholders of Australian companies, as well as a lot of New Zealand shareholders.
And how do you think that's worked out?
A lobby group which opposes all sales of farmland is questioning a real estate company's foray into China. Well, it should say all overseas sales of farmland. Harcourt's Real Estate says it's having problems getting buyers for top-end properties, and it's worth seeing if there's interest among the wealthy in China. Well, we'll hear from spokesperson for Save the Farms, Tony Boucher, in a moment. But first, the managing director of Harcourt's Cooper & Co., Martin Cooper, who told me from Shanghai about the sort of properties they're marketing.
We've got quite a good collection of apartments. We have some beautiful coastal properties, some luxury homes for coastal waterfront properties. We have a number of rural properties with, 5 to 10 acre blocks with a nice established home. We've got commercial properties, some CBD Auckland properties, and some development sites.
Why the Chinese? Is it simply that you've got the Shanghai Expo and there's the ability to hook into the pavilion?
No, well, the Chinese economy, we all know about it. It's growing at a phenomenal rate. Chinese government's indicated that it's time to look at spending offshore, so they're freeing up those opportunities. And we already have in the vicinity of 150,000 Chinese people living in New Zealand. So we thought with the focus on Expo, John Key's initiatives, New Zealand government with the free trade agreement, the desire to grow trade between New Zealand and China by 2015 up to 20 billion, that it's going to be happening anyway. So let's take a good selection of New Zealand product over and make some connections and look at helping that process.
You know, nōku te mana, nōku te nōku te whenua, nōku te mana is very important. A very key concept for Māoridom to hold on to. When you settle your treaty claims, it is not to buy shares in companies, because you have lost your mana. Your mana has gone to Coca-Cola, to Google, to WhatsApp, to Tencent. Other people are controlling your money. You need to actually hoko whenua. Because one nui in Māhia, I went to school with the Walkers and the Ormond family. The Ormond family have sold most of the land in Māhia, right? One day comes along Peter Beck and says, gosh, I want to set up a rocket lab where I can fire my rockets into the sky. And he went and he found this place called One Nui. And One Nui is owned by the Walkers. They don't really have to farm now, but the mana of having the land is paramount. Mana is, it's like I've always said, whoever owns the land is king or queen. I've got our Queen Bee over here, Ingrid, Whangara B5. It goes from Pauaua to Mātaki. Awesome. Awesome when you drive for at least 40 minutes from Gisborne to Tolaga Bay. On the right-hand side at least is all Māori whenua. All. Awesome. 90% of the coastline is Māori. I read in your articles there, 50% of the seafood is Māori. You've got to have the resource before you can actually do the trade. And you've got to have control of that resource before you can have the trade. And so buy more quota. Don't buy shares. Buy more quota. Buy more land. The other thing, time is nothing. They talk about COVID, SARS, pandemics here and there, downturns in the economies, the GFCs, this current one, the Asian share market crash, the New Zealand, Australian share market crash in the 80s, that's nothing. Don't worry about it. For Māori, you are intergenerational. Mō ake tonu tō rā moa pōpō, mai Māui tiki tiki a tāranga, taino ki e nai nei, me ki me anga whakamua. From the day that you came to Aotearoa, where Māui fished up this wonderful land, te ika nui a Māui, no pōraurangi anō, and also to today, going into the future, time is nothing. I just want to emphasize that because everybody's talking about time. Someone's starting to colonize your minds to say that time is important. E hara. Time is not important. Te mea nui is the trust in the whakawhanaungatanga. Your generations of many generations to come, and I come from thousands of generations, you've come from thousands of generations, High Commissioners come from thousands of generations. There is no hurry, I can tell you that now. Because your hurry is to get things right, is to have that trust and have that intergenerational thought, have the mana. Your mana is important, that you do not sell your mana.
So, I mean, if it's benefiting the immigrants and it's not benefiting us, but it's not really hurting us, then we're doing a good thing for the world, right? But I think your suggestion is that it may actually be detrimental to our development as well.
That's right, and part of that brings it to the sort of second stage of my story, which is that New Zealand, being such a remote economy, has always largely been built on its natural resources. I mean, we all know this. You know, what does New Zealand export? We export, forestry and meat and wool and dairy products. We actually export tourism, which is also a natural resource, because nobody comes to New Zealand to see our fantastic architecture or art. They come for the natural resource, the physical environment of New Zealand. I estimate that probably only 15% of our exports are based on anything other than natural resources, and even some of those, export education notably, are effectively subsidised by being tied in with the immigration system. So what we've got is an economy that's built on natural resources, that looks as though it probably always will be built on natural resources. People have been talking for 50 years in New Zealand about gravitating away from a reliance on natural resources, and it just hasn't happened. The composition of what we export has changed, with more dairy, more wine, less meat, less wool, a bit more tourism, but we haven't managed that transition away from it. And my argument's been sort of twofold, really. One is that if you've got a fixed volume of natural resources and a lot more people, then simply put, you're dividing nature's bounty across a lot more people, and the amount that's available per capita diminishes automatically. You could think of Norway, for example. Norway has about 2/3 of the oil in the North Sea. Britain has about 1/3. But because Norway is a country of 5 million people, they're at the top of the OECD league tables. It's an astonishingly wealthy country. Britain, with 1/3 of it, 65 million people, is well down in the second tier of OECD economies.
And I think we talked about Iceland as well, which actually has an explicit policy of trying to maintain its population because it has abundant cod resources, and they don't want any more people because they'd have to share the cod.
Yeah. I mean, cod and aluminium electricity exports is the Icelandic economy, and it's created a very productive, very wealthy society, and that's what we've largely, increasingly failed to do.
And I think, so it's the proposition, that's quite a simple one. We've got a certain amount of natural resources, we increase the number of people, therefore our prosperity is natural resources divided by number of people, therefore we're worse off. I've also seen you discuss, well, okay, that would be okay if we were then building up our capital in other ways, but potentially immigration is hampering us there as well.
Yes, and so as I said, the business of the Auckland economy is building Auckland. What happens when migrants come in? Understandably, they want a house just like you or I do. They need a factory, their kids need schools, they need hospitals and roads. So there's big infrastructure demands that are put on the economy. And those big infrastructure demands, all else equal, put upward pressure on interest rates, and they put upward pressure on the exchange rate. So for the last 30 years, even though our interest rates are very low now, they still are among the highest anywhere in the advanced world. When interest rates are high, firms' hurdle rates of return that they're considering when they're considering new investments are higher than otherwise. Not so much business investment occurs. Business investment as a share of the economy has been lower here than in almost every OECD country in the last 50 years, even though we've had probably the 5th fastest population growth rate in the OECD during that time. A high interest rate has put pressure on the exchange rate. For the last 20 years, our exchange rate has been fluctuating around pretty high levels. That makes your overseas holiday, my Amazon book purchases, a whole lot cheaper, but it also means that industries that are based here it's that much harder to get established. If you're considering basing here and the exchange rate's 25% higher than it probably should be, you've got to have an astonishingly good business for that to be viable. And what we actually see is firms, I mean, even Xero is a good example, right? It's been set up based here in Wellington. Most likely in 10 years' time, very little of it will be based in Wellington or in New Zealand. That's been the story of so many technology firms, so many manufacturing firms in New Zealand in the last 30 or 40 years. We have able and talented people, there's no doubt about that. We have a reasonably good environment for setting up new businesses in the sense of, registering your company in a relatively simple tax system. But the economics just doesn't work out. The interest rates are high, the exchange rate's high, these firms are typically more valuable to some investor overseas, and the opportunities gravitate away from New Zealand. And consistent with that, what we've seen New Zealanders doing for the last 50 years is leaving New Zealand. And so my argument is that policy has failed to respect the fundamental insight of New Zealanders. Who knows best what's going on in New Zealand but New Zealanders? New Zealanders, we've lost roughly 1 million people net in the last 40 to 50 years who've all said to themselves, the opportunities for myself or my kids or my grandchildren are better, particularly in Australia, than they are here. And yet despite that, it's gone on for decades. Successive governments have said, oh, no, we can't have this. We need to run policy to try and offset this. And that's been the explicit part of the policy to say, oh, New Zealanders are leaving, but we just need to substitute them out for some other people coming in. That's not how you build a cohesive society, among other things, but it's also not the way in which you build a strong economy. The analogy I use to people is look at Tairawhiti. Tairawhiti's population now, I think, is about half what it was 70 or 80 years ago. Just think what would have happened if governments had said, this is a terrible thing, we've got to send more people to Tairawhiti. The opportunities just aren't there. Precisely. You drive down the average income and the average wage that's sustainable in Tairawhiti.